On 10th of October 732, on a cold field somewhere between Tours and Poitiers, several tens of thousands of warriors stand facing each other, not knowing that in a few hours a legend will be born here, the salvation of Europe, and at the same time a myth that historians will argue about for another 1,300 years. From the south comes the fast, confident cavalry fist of the Umayyads. From the north, a silent wall of Frankish infantry, commanded by a man named Charles, not yet Martel. By evening he will earn his nickname, the Hammer. Imagine you are an Arab or Berber horseman from Al-Andalus. You've watched the kingdoms of Spain collapse, seen cities open their gates to the banners of the caliph. Your commanders tell you, to the north are rich monasteries, silver slaves, weak Christians who run at the mere sight of our cavalry. And now you stand in the clammy wind of Gaul, shivering in a light cloak, staring at a dark line of men in woolen capes, frozen on a hill like a fence of spears. One more moment, and it will be a routine raid. Only this routine raid will suddenly crash into an icy wall. The main idea of this story is simple and uncomfortable. At Tours, it's not one civilization miraculously saving the world from another. Here, cold logistics and infantry discipline break a self-confident cavalry raid. Here, the reputation of Charles Martel and future Carolingian Europe is born, and at the same time, a legend that turns a fairly local clash into the battle for the fate of the continent. By the end of the story, you'll understand how a collision of two exhausted armies turned into a convenient myth about a savior of Christendom. To understand why these people even met under a black autumn sky, we need to wind back a couple of decades. In 701, the armies of the Umayyad Caliphate cross Gibraltar, smash the Visigothic kingdom, and in just a few years take almost the whole Iberian Peninsula. The empire ruled from Damascus stretches from India to the Atlantic. On the map, it looks like a steamroller slowly rolling over anything that doesn't manage to negotiate first. North of the Pyrenees is a completely different world. Fragmented Christian Europe lives in permanent feudal chaos. There are the Franks, the Merovingian kingdom, where the real ruler hasn't been the king for a long time, but the mayor of the palace, the man running the royal court. There is the semi-independent Duchy of Aquitaine under Odo the Great, who sometimes allies with the Franks and sometimes fights them. To the east are other tribes and petty lords. There is no unified Europe to heroically save. There are neighbors, rivals, and potential vassals. The first serious clash with Muslims north of the Pyrenees happens already in 721 near Toulouse. Odo of Aquitaine manages to defeat an Arab-Berber army, and for a while is written down as a savior. But success goes to his head. 10 years later, new governors of Al-Andalus take the same route, burning towns, taking loot and slaves. In 732, the governor Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi calmly leads an army across the Pyrenees and crushes that same Odo on the Garonne near Bordeaux. Aquitaine is in flames, and the former hero is forced to run to the hated Frankish mayor for help. Charles, son of Pepin of Herstal, by this time is not a king, but in practice the master of the Frankish realm. He has spent the years before Tours hammering a simple idea into rebellious dukes and neighbors. There will be one master, and that's me. He doesn't build a glamorous army of knights, but heavy infantry, free men and semi-dependent warriors who march with him from campaign to campaign, get used to holding the line and receiving reward only after victory. This is not a one-off levy, but the embryo of a professional war machine. Now for the imba, the broken mechanic. The Umayyads' advantage is obvious and spectacular. Fast, maneuverable cavalry. Arab and Berber horsemen are used to deep raid tactics, hit, devastate, carry off the loot. Against loose levies and heavy nobles tangled up in personal duels, this is almost a cheat code. They race along the roads of Gaul, burn Bordeaux, move toward the monastery of Saint Martin of Tours, one of the richest holy sites in the region. For them, all this looks like just another, albeit big, run for trophies. Charles's imba is less flashy, but much nastier for the attacker. He stakes everything on a dense infantry shield wall with long spears, reminiscent of late Roman and Byzantine tactics, but adapted to his realities. And he understands a simple thing. Cavalry is strong in charge and maneuver, so the battlefield has to kill both. That's why Charles doesn't rush out to meet the raiders on open plain. He quietly moves across their path and chooses hilly, wooded ground, where cavalry will be cramped and uncomfortable as the place for battle. The tragic blindness of the Umayyads lies in their certainty that past victories will automatically transfer to this new theatre. They barely scout Gaul, don't really understand how many men Charles can gather, and keep behaving like a raid column. A long line, tons of plunder, focused on speed instead of heavy siege or infantry warfare. They don't prepare for a prolonged campaign in a cold climate and count on local lords once again fighting separately. It's that classic winner's arrogance that doesn't bother to read enemy reports. Charles sets his trap not with some cute ambush unit in the bushes, but with the very choice of position. He moves across Abd al-Rahman's line of advance and occupies a rise by the road to Tours. According to the sources, he forms his warriors into a dense mass, almost a square, with a narrow front and flanks anchored on woods and hills. There's simply no room for the cavalry to fan out into a crushing wave. His men stand in several ranks, spears jutting forward, shields covering their bodies, and behind all this, the iron discipline of people who have lived by war for a decade. The week before the battle is a strange pause. The armies stand facing each other, Franks and Aquitanians on the hill, the Muslim army below. Between them, occasional skirmishes between scouts. Abd al-Rahman realizes he's facing no peasant rabble but a major force, yet he doesn't know the exact numbers. The forest hides the depth of the Frankish lines. He waits for straggling units to arrive. Charles doesn't hurry. Every cold day works against men who came from the mild Spanish climate and are used to living off fast raids, not supplies. The weather quietly becomes another ally of the Franks. October in these parts is not desert heat, but damp, bone-deep cold. Abd al-Rahman's men wake in wet cloaks, freeze at night, and have to guard an enormous camp stuffed with plunder. They did not prepare for a northern autumn, didn't bring heavy furs and stockpiles, because they had planned a quick strike on the monastery at Tours and back. For Charles, each such day is one more step toward forcing the enemy to fight tired and irritated. Inside the Umayyad camp, another invisible crack is growing, a psychological one. The more loot piles up behind the army, the stronger the fear of losing it. For many riders, this whole campaign is not a holy mission, but a chance to get rich. A camp full of gold, fabrics, and captives slowly turns into a magnet that, at the crucial moment, will pull men back from the battle line. Charles doesn't see this directly, but he will exploit it perfectly. The day of battle comes after several days of tense silence. Abd al-Rahman finally decides, if he leaves Charles sitting on the hill, the Frank will only get stronger, and the raid will turn into pointless shivering in the cold. The Muslim cavalry forms into attack waves, drums thunder, prayers to Allah and to Christ rise from both sides of the field, and the avalanche of horsemen begins to climb the hill toward the immobile Frankish wall. According to the chronicles, Arab and Berber units try several times to smash Charles's square. Imagine you're standing in the first rank of the Frankish infantry. In front of you is your spear. To your left and right are men just like you. You see a wall of horses and the glitter of blades rushing toward you. Every instinct screams, "Run!" But behind you are your comrades, your honor, your land, and your share of the spoils. Arrows and javelins fly forward. The first ranks of cavalry crash into the forest of spears. Horses, unused to that kind of resistance, rear and slam hooves into shields. Some go down, riders tumble under the hooves of the next wave. You feel the ground shake under you, and then realize you're still standing. The wall has not collapsed. The battle turns into a sticky, grinding slaughter. This is not the usual raid through a panicked crowd for the horsemen. It's frontal charges into a solid mass that again and again get stuck in spears and shields. The Franks almost never launch a classic countercharge. Their job is to hold the formation. At one point, parts of the Muslim cavalry manage to wedge into Charles's ranks. Close combat erupts, and there are accounts that Martel himself nearly dies when an enemy detachment breaks through to the center. His men close ranks around him, literally shielding their leader with bodies and shields. By midday, the fight is bogged down. No one can grab a decisive advantage, and here that trap of greed finally snaps shut. According to several Christian sources, part of the Frankish troops, possibly Aquitanians, slip around the field and strike at the Umayyad camp. The camp of wealth is not some abstract rear position, but each rider's personal future. The news that their baggage is under attack runs through the lines like an electric shock. Some men start peeling away from the front and sprinting back to save their gold and captives. The formation cracks. al-Rahman tries to stop this collapse. Reconstructions have him galloping along his lines, trying to turn men back toward the Frankish wall. But in such chaos, with some of the army already wheeling around and the rest still jammed against the spears, it's almost suicidal. In the confusion, he ends up surrounded and is killed, not by some divine hammer, but by very real iron and panic. The commander who is supposed to hold the army together disappears in the melee, and that becomes the final blow to its moral backbone. Evening falls. The Franks, following the habits of early medieval armies, do not go charging into a night pursuit. Darkness is the perfect time for ambushes and stupid losses. Charles orders his men to hold their positions. During the night, in the Umayyad camp, they make a different choice. Without a commander, with morale shattered on frozen ground, they strike their tents and begin retreating south. In the morning, Frankish scouts, instead of the expected new attack, find an empty camp, abandoned tents, some of the loot and the bodies of those who couldn't leave. The battlefield after Tours is not a neat front line from a textbook. It's chaos, dead men and horses, discarded shields and spears, bales of cloth scattered about, broken wagons full of plunder. The number of dead is one of the favorite toys of historians and propagandists. Medieval chroniclers can solemnly write about hundreds of thousands of Muslims killed and only 1,500 fallen Franks. Modern researchers look at the region's logistics and understand real numbers are much more modest, and both armies probably lost thousands, not hundreds of thousands, of men. The key points. al-Rahman is dead. His army rolls back beyond the Pyrenees. Odo of Aquitaine, who had still been trying to play the role of an independent ruler after defeat and rescue by Charles, finally ends up in the Franks' shadow and soon leaves the stage, giving way to Charles's sons. Charles himself returns home with a new level of authority. Now he's not just the man who forced his neighbors to submit, but the warrior who stopped the Muslims. In the minds of his contemporaries, those are two very different scales of glory. This doesn't mean that after Tours Muslims never show up in Gaul again. The Umayyads will still try to secure a foothold in Provence. There will be new raids and alliances with rebellious local lords. But the deep breakthrough to the north, into the heart of Frankish lands, really does stop. Tours becomes a symbolic boundary. After it, the Franks, not the Aquitanians or Visigoths, are seen as the main northern counterweight to the power of Al-Andalus. Inside the Frankish world, the consequence is even clearer. The victory at Tours reinforces the ability of Charles and his descendants to ultimately replace the lawful kings entirely. 1 generation later, his son Pepin the Short will depose a Merovingian king, and his grandson Charlemagne will build that Carolingian empire we love to show on maps as the rebirth of the West. Without Tours, this might have happened anyway. But this battle becomes a convenient brick in the legend that God himself is pointing to whose side is stronger. On the other side of the Mediterranean, the battle doesn't vanish either. In the Arabic tradition, it's known as Balat ash-Shuhada, the road of the martyrs, or the field of the martyrs. For many Muslim authors, it's not the end of expansion, but one of many battles where fortune turned the wrong way. They rarely treat it as the cosmic turning point beloved by European chroniclers of the 19th century. The difference in scale in the memory of each side is a perfect example of how the same slaughter turns into very different stories in different cultures. In the modern era, the Battle of Tours becomes a magnet for big words. Gibbon and his 19th century colleagues draw dramatic pictures. Had Charles lost, minarets would rise in Paris and London. Imagination works, book sales go up. In the 20th and 21st centuries, some historians start cooling things down. They remind us that Abd al-Rahman's force was a raiding army, that logistics wouldn't allow it to simply conquer all of Europe, and that Umayyad politics at the time were busy with a dozen other fronts. Tours remains an important victory, but stops being a magical civilization switch. And yet, even after all the caveats, there is a real turning point in this battle. The illusion that cavalry and speed alone decide everything dies here. On a distant raid, in a cold climate, against an enemy who deliberately forces you to fight where you are weakest, the advantage of horsemen evaporates. A different image of power is born: heavy infantry, discipline, the ability to wait, the choice of ground, the very things on which the Carolingian war machine and later many European armies will be built. Strip Tours of all the romantic framing, and you're left with a simple, rather crude picture. Several tens of thousands of people, terrified of dying and ravenous to survive richer, are ramming into each other on a cold field. One side believes too much in speed and past victories, the other is too stubborn to take a single step back. Between them are mud, screams, breaking iron and golden fabrics lying in blood. Later legends will say the fate of civilization was decided here. Reality suggests a harsher conclusion. The world is often changed not by heroic speeches, but by which hill someone chooses, how cold it is that day, and how long your people are willing to stand in line while everything else falls apart.